They said no white man ever survived the Apache Queen. Until a cowboy entered her tent. The sun had barely begun its climb over the horizon when the cowboy rode into the wide, empty plains of the southwest. The land stretched endlessly before him, golden and harsh, dotted with jagged rocks and low, dusty shrubs. Every step of his horse kicked up tiny clouds of dry dust that hung in the air, shimmering in the early morning light. He tightened the reins, feeling the chill of the morning air on his face, but the warmth of the rising sun promised that the day would grow hot quickly. He had traveled far to reach this place, guided by curiosity and the faint hope of finding work, but also by a story. A story he had heard countless times in the local towns. A story that whispered through campfires and saloons like a warning. It was the tale of the Apache Queen, a woman whose strength and courage had become almost legendary. No white man had survived meeting her. They said she was clever, fearless, and unyielding, someone who ruled her people with an iron will and a keen mind. To approach her lands was to court danger. Yet the cowboy felt a spark of defiance in his chest. He was a man who had always relied on his instincts, his skill with a rope, and the quiet wisdom he had learned from a life spent on horseback. Fear was not something he welcomed, but he understood it, respected it. And the fear he felt now was different. It was the mixture of respect and curiosity that comes before stepping into unknown territory. The townsfolk had warned him. They had leaned close over rough wooden tables, eyes wide and voices low, telling him of the men who had tried to enter the Queen's lands. Some vanished without a trace. Others returned with stories of impossible challenges, only to die quietly later, their spirits broken by what they had witnessed. But still, the cowboy felt a steady pull in his heart. He wanted to see the truth for himself. He wanted to test his own courage. As he rode, he noticed the signs of life in the land. Tracks in the dust hinted at the movement of animals. Coyotes, deer, maybe a wolf or two. Birds circled high above, their shadows small and sharp against the golden ground. He could feel the rhythm of the land, the pulse of something alive, beneath the quiet surface. And then he saw them, subtle markers of human presence. A broken branch here, footprints near a waterhole there, but nothing overt, nothing threatening, but enough to tell him that someone else was near, someone who knew the land better than he ever could. He tightened his grip on the reins, urging his horse forward with a mixture of caution and determination. The cowboy had learned long ago that confidence and caution often walked hand in hand. One could not survive long without both. And as he moved deeper into the territory, the stories he had heard began to feel real. The air seemed heavier somehow, charged with quiet energy, as if the land itself was aware of his presence. By midday, the sun was high and fierce, beating down without mercy. The cowboy found himself near a small ridge overlooking a narrow valley. From this vantage point, he could see smoke rising gently from a distant camp. His heart quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. The smoke was a sign of life, and he knew, deep down, that he was drawing closer to the Apache Queen. He approached the valley carefully, keeping to the shadows of the rocks and using the natural cover of the land. His horse moved quietly, trained to be patient and obedient. Every step felt measured, every movement deliberate. The cowboy had learned to read the land, to listen to the quiet messages it sent through wind, dust, and shadow. And today, those messages were urgent, charged with the possibility of danger. As he neared the camp, he paused behind a large boulder to observe. The camp was simple, yet orderly. A few tents made of animal hides were arranged in a loose circle, with a fire at the center sending up wisps of smoke. Biggs and Purpose tending to daily tasks, speaking quietly among themselves. And then at the edge of the camp he saw her, tall, commanding, and impossible to ignore. The Apache Queen! She stood near the fire, her posture straight, her gaze sharp and unyielding. There was a quiet authority about her, the kind that did not need to be announced with words or displays. Even from a distance, the cowboy could feel the strength radiating from her. She was not only a leader, she was a force of nature, someone who demanded respect through her presence alone. For a moment, the cowboy simply watched, heart pounding with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He had expected danger, of course. He had expected challenge. But what struck him now was not fear. It was fascination. There was something magnetic about her. A power that was both inspiring and intimidating. Breath. He reminded himself to stay calm. To approach too boldly could provoke hostility. To hesitate too long could waste the opportunity. The balance was delicate, and he knew that. Breathe.
Slowly, he urged his horse forward, keeping his movements careful and measured. He needed to show courage without arrogance, respect without weakness.
Breath as he approached the edge of the camp. A young scout noticed him. The scout's hand went to the bow at his side, eyes narrowing. The cowboy raised his hand slightly, showing that he meant no harm. He spoke in a calm, measured voice, introducing himself, explaining that he sought only to meet the leader and learn from her. The scout studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, signaling that he could proceed. But with caution. Every step felt heavier now, the air thick with expectation. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving the queen. She, in turn, regarded him silently, her gaze assessing, curious, yet wary. The cowboy dismounted quietly, letting the reins of his horse slip into his hand. He approached the queen, each step measured and respectful. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken rules of engagement. One wrong move could end everything. But he had come too far to turn back now. When he finally stood before her, the Apache queen did not greet him with words. She simply looked. A steady, piercing gaze that seemed to see past his exterior and into his very intentions. The cowboy held her gaze unflinching. And in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Neither spoke, yet both recognized the challenge in the other. Hours seemed to pass in that quiet exchange, filled with subtle movements, shifting glances, and unspoken questions. The cowboy could feel her testing him, measuring his courage, his honesty, his respect. Braith. And he, in turn, measured her strength, her wisdom, and her quiet command. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm, carrying the weight of authority. She asked him why he had come, what he hoped to gain, and what he would risk. The cowboy answered with honesty, speaking of curiosity, of respect, of the desire to understand. He made no excuses, no false bravado. He showed that he was willing to face danger, not for glory, but for truth. The Apache queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, then relaxing slightly. There was a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of his courage and integrity. She did not smile, but the tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, the cowboy realized that he had survived the first encounter. Frowned and despising him had entered the territory of the Apache queen. And he had stood before her without faltering, but he also knew that this was only the beginning. The true test lay ahead, the test of respect, understanding and survival in a world that was both beautiful and dangerous, ruled by a leader whose strength was unmatched. The evening settled over the land, the sky painted with hues of orange, pink, and purple. The cowboy sat quietly near the edge of the camp, reflecting on the day's events. He had taken the first step into a story that would challenge him, teach him, and perhaps change him forever. He felt the weight of history, of legend, and of human courage pressing gently upon him. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, the Apache queen watched from her tent, aware of the new presence in her lands. She did not speak, she did not act, But her mind was already measuring, calculating, understanding the man who had dared to enter her world. And in that quiet, charged moment, the balance of curiosity, caution, and courage hung in the air, ready to unfold in ways neither of them could yet predict. Throughout, the night deepened and the wind whispered through the rocks and shrubs, carrying stories of the past and hints of the future. The cowboy knew that dawn would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new tests of character. But for now he allowed himself a moment of stillness, knowing that he had survived the first step in a journey that would be remembered for years to come. Inspiration, and in the quiet, under the endless stars, the legend of the Apache Queen grew a little larger, tempered now by the arrival of the man who dared to meet her gaze and live to tell the tale. The morning sun rose slowly over the valley, spilling warm light across the tents and casting long shadows of the sparse trees and rocks. The cowboy woke early, careful not to disturb the camp, and felt the crisp air on his face. Last night had been a night of observation, of silent understanding, but today promised something more, an encounter, a test, and perhaps the beginning of a relationship that neither he nor the Apache Queen could yet imagine. He approached the central fire, where a few people were already moving about, tending to cooking and daily chores. There was a rhythm to the camp, a quiet harmony that came from years of working and living together. The cowboy noticed how every movement was efficient, deliberate, and full of purpose. Nothing was wasted, nothing overlooked. Every glance and gesture seemed to carry meaning. He felt both admiration and caution. These were people who understood the land and each other in ways he could not yet fully grasp. From the corner of his eye, he saw her, the Apache Queen. She moved among her people like a shadow and light combined, silent yet commanding. Her presence was undeniable, a force that drew attention without needing words. The cowboy's heart beat a little faster. Today he would meet her fully, without distance, without the safety of observation. The day he would speak to her face to face. He took a deep breath and approached her tent. The air felt charged, as if the land itself knew what was about to happen. She was standing at the entrance, waiting, her eyes steady, her posture unyielding. There was no anger, no smile, just calm, quiet authority. The cowboy stopped a few steps away, keeping his gaze respectful. He had learned long ago that posture and attitude could speak louder than words, and he wanted to convey honesty, courage, and respect all at once. "You came early," she said, her voice calm but firm. It carried over the quiet sounds of the camp, commanding attention without shouting.
"I did,"
the cowboy replied, his voice steady. "I wanted to see more than what I saw yesterday. I wanted to understand." She studied him carefully, tilting her head slightly as if measuring the truth in his words. "Many have come before you, claiming curiosity. Few have left with anything but fear or regret." "I'm not here for fear," he said. "I'm here to learn, to understand, and to respect your people."
There was a long pause. The wind rustled the tent flaps, and somewhere a bird cried out in the distance.
The Apache Queen's gaze did not waver. Then, slowly, she stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The inside of her tent was simple but organized. Hides were spread carefully across the ground, and small items, bowls, tools, and ornaments were arranged with precision. Nothing seemed out of place. The cowboy noticed the subtle signs of a life lived with awareness and skill. He had entered many homes, but few had the sense of quiet strength that this space carried. She gestured for him to sit, and he did, keeping his back straight and his eyes respectful. For several minutes they simply watched each other, studying the silent gestures, the small movements, the expressions that gave away little yet revealed more than words could. You speak honestly, she said finally. But honesty alone does not prove courage or understanding. I know, the cowboy replied. I didn't come to prove myself. I came to see the truth, to see you, your people, and your way of life. She regarded him in silence again, then rose and circled him slowly. Her eyes were sharp, assessing every detail, every movement. The cowboy remained still, careful not to make sudden motions. He understood that this was a test, a measurement of patience, respect, and presence.
You move carefully, she said, but care is not always enough.
Many men have moved carefully and still failed.
I know the risk, he said quietly.
And I accept it. I would rather fail trying honestly than succeed by deception.
For a long moment, she seemed to consider this.
Then, almost imperceptibly, her posture softened. Not a smile, not a gesture of friendliness, but a small acknowledgement that he had passed the first measure of her attention. She led him to a small area outside the tent where the sunlight fell warm and bright. You will see, she said, that life here is not easy. Rarest. Strength is measured not by weapons alone, but by patience, skill, and understanding of the land. You will observe and learn, or you will leave. There is no other way. The cowboy nodded, grateful for the chance to learn. Over the next hours, he followed her and her people through their daily routines. He watched as they hunted, gathering small game with quiet efficiency, moving through the brush as shadows themselves. He observed how they used traps, signs in the wind to their advantage, relying on knowledge and experience rather than brute force. He also witnessed their care for each other. The Apache Queen was not only a leader in action but in thought. She gave instructions, guided without harshness, and corrected mistakes with patience. Her people listened, not out of fear, but out of respect and trust.
The cowboy felt a growing admiration.
The stories he had heard in town had spoken of her wrath, but what he saw was far more complex. She was strong, yes, but also fair and wise, and her leadership came from a deep understanding of balance and responsibility. As the day went on, he began to ask questions, careful and measured, never challenging but always seeking to understand. He asked about their tools, their hunting methods, their traditions. She answered, sometimes with a question in return, sometimes with a story that revealed more than a simple explanation could. You see, she said, watching him try to follow a tracking sign, knowledge is not given. It is earned. Observation, patience, attention. The land speaks, but only to those who listen.
I'm listening, he said, careful to show his sincerity. Words are easy, she replied.
Listening is not. By late afternoon, the cowboy had learned more than he had imagined possible. He could read the subtle signs of movement, understand the small clues left by animals, and appreciate the skill required to survive and thrive in this land. And through it all, the Apache Queen watched, occasionally guiding, occasionally testing, but never letting him forget that he was an outsider in her world.
As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the air shifted.
A faint sound carried from the hills, a distant voice, a shout, perhaps from another group. The cowboy tensed, realizing that danger was never far away in these lands. The Apache Queen's eyes narrowed slightly and she moved swiftly, signaling for him to stay close. Together, they approached the ridge overlooking the source of the sound. From this vantage point, they could see a small group of travelers approaching, unaware of the camp below. The Queen's gaze was sharp, assessing the situation. But she did not speak, but her body language was clear. Prepare for anything. The cowboy felt his heart race. He had entered her world to learn, but now he realized that survival required more than understanding. It required courage and quick thinking. The queen motioned silently and he followed, careful not to make any sudden moves that might betray his presence. The travelers passed, unaware of the camp hidden below, and the tension eased. The cowboy exhaled slowly, grateful for the moment.
But the queen did not relax entirely. She reminded him quietly, "The land tests us constantly."
You have learned much today, but the true measure of courage is not in observation alone. It is in action, in presence, and in respect for all that surrounds you.
Bay.
The cowboy nodded, understanding that his journey had only just begun.
He had seen her, had learned from her, and had survived the first full day in her presence. But he also knew that the challenges ahead would be greater, the tests harder, and the lessons deeper. As evening fell, the camp settled into quiet activity. Fires were lit, shadows danced across the tents, and the sounds of cooking and conversation filled the air. The cowboy sat at the edge of the camp reflecting on what he had experienced. He realized that the stories he had heard in town had been both true and false, true in the sense of the queen's power and skill, false in the exaggeration of fear. What he had witnessed was strength tempered by wisdom, authority balanced with care. The Apache queen returned to her tent, and the cowboy watched her, sensing the quiet challenge she had placed before him. He had survived the day, yes, but survival was only the beginning. He understood that to truly earn respect he would need to continue learning, listening, and proving himself, not through words alone, but through action, humility, and courage. At night, under the wide expanse of stars, the cowboy felt a mixture of excitement and determination. He had entered a world that many feared, a world that demanded respect and understanding. He had met the Apache queen, and he had survived. But he also knew that the real journey, the one that would test his heart, his mind, and his spirit, was only beginning. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, in her tent, the Apache queen considered him as well. She had seen courage, honesty, and respect, but she also knew that the days ahead would reveal the true measure of the man who dared to enter her world. The land was alive with possibility, danger, and the promise of discovery. Both of them, in their own ways, understood that this meeting was the start of something larger than either could predict. A story of survival, respect, an understanding that would challenge legends and create new ones. Burst. And so the night deepened, quiet except for the whispers of wind and the distant cry of an owl, carrying with it the knowledge the journey had only just begun. The next morning, the cowboy awoke before dawn. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. Today he would move beyond observation and into action. Breath. Yesterday had been about learning and understanding, but today promised challenges that would test more than patience. It would test courage, judgment, and trust. The Apache queen had already left her tent. He followed quietly, careful not to disturb the subtle rhythm of the camp. Her movements were precise, each step deliberate, as if she carried the pulse of the land within her. The cowboy could feel the tension in the air, a sense that today would not be like yesterday. Something was approaching, something he could not yet see but could sense in the whispers of wind and the distant echoes of movement. As they moved toward the edge of the camp, the queen spoke quietly, her voice measured.
The land teaches in many ways.
Sometimes through calm, sometimes through challenge.
Today you will see both.
The cowboy nodded. He had learned to trust her guidance. Her words were often both warning and instruction, and he knew better than to underestimate them. They walked through a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side, shaded in the early light. The sounds of the camp faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, and the soft crunch of their boots on the dirt. Suddenly, the queen halted. She raised her hand, signaling him to stop. He froze, scanning the area. Ahead, hidden partially by a rise in the terrain, a small group of riders approached. The cowboy could sense their intent. They were outsiders, strangers to the land, and possibly dangerous. He glanced at the queen, whose eyes were fixed on them with calm precision. "Stay behind me," she whispered. "We do not yet know their intentions, but we must be ready." The cowboy followed her instructions without hesitation. They crouched behind rocks, observing the approaching group. The riders were loud, careless, unaware of the people who had lived in the land for generations. The cowboy's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the realization that he would need to act carefully, think quickly, and follow her lead. The queen gestured silently, and they moved closer, positioning themselves so that the riders would pass without noticing the camp hidden nearby. The cowboy marveled at her skill. The way she read the land, the distance, the wind, and the movements of the strangers. It was not just knowledge, it was instinct, honed over years of living and surviving in this unforgiving terrain. The riders passed, unaware, and the tension eased slightly. The cowboy exhaled, impressed by her mastery. But the queen did not relax entirely.
Breath. She reminded him quietly, "The land rewards caution, but it also rewards readiness. Never forget either."
They continued their journey, moving through valleys and across small streams, learning the subtle signs of wildlife and the way the wind carried messages of movement. The cowboy began to notice how the queen could interpret almost everything: the direction of birds in flight, the broken twigs on the ground, even the scent carried by the wind. He realized that survival was not just about strength or weapons, but about awareness and respect for the world around you. As midday approached, the sun climbed high, beating down relentlessly. Best. They stopped at a shaded area near a stream to rest and drink. The cowboy marveled at the queen's endurance. Brave. She had traveled farther and faster than most men he had known, yet she showed no sign of fatigue. Her people had trained her to be strong, but also to be wise, careful, and patient. He realized that her strength came not just from muscle, but from discipline and knowledge. "Do you see how the land gives and takes?" she asked. "It provides water, food, shelter, but only if you understand it, respect it, and move with it." "I see," he replied. "I think I'm starting to understand." She regarded him quietly, her eyes piercing yet calm. Inspiration. Understanding is one thing. Acting wisely is another. "Today you will act." It was not long before the test began. From the ridge above, a herd of wild horses appeared, panicked by the riders from earlier. The animals stampeded toward the canyon where they had walked, and the cowboy realized immediately that their path would take them dangerously close to the camp. If the horses were not guided, the camp and its people could be in danger. The queen gestured to him. "We must move quickly. You will help me guide them. Observe, follow, and act with me."
The cowboy nodded, adrenaline surging.
Impression. He had learned tracking. He had learned patience, but this would require coordination, timing, and courage. The queen led, moving with fluid grace, directing the flow of the horses with subtle signals and sharp whistles. The cowboy mirrored her movements, careful to stay in sync, guiding the animals without startling them further. Hours seemed to pass in a blur of motion. The dust rose around them, mixing with the heat of the sun and the pounding of hooves. The cowboy felt his muscles burn and sweat run down his back, but he did not falter. The queen's eyes remained focused, scanning every movement, adjusting their strategy with precision. Finally, the herd passed safely, moving away from the camp without causing harm. The cowboy collapsed onto the ground briefly, catching his breath, while the queen stood tall, her expression calm but satisfied. "You did well," she said quietly. "But courage alone is not enough. Protect. You must continue to learn, to observe, and to respect what you do not yet fully understand."
The cowboy nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. He had acted in her world, followed her lead, and survived.
But more importantly, he had begun to understand her methods, her patience, and the quiet authority that commanded respect. As the day wore on, they returned to the camp, where the people greeted them with quiet nods and acknowledgement. The cowboy realized that trust was being extended to him slowly, carefully. It was not given freely, but earned through observation, respect, and action. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, the queen spoke to him privately. "You have done more than most who have come before you," she said. "You have shown courage, patience, and respect. But the world is never without challenge. Tomorrow, you will face another test, one that will measure not only your courage but your understanding of responsibility and trust." The cowboy listened carefully, absorbing every word. He knew that each day with her brought new lessons, new opportunities, and new challenges. He had entered her world as an outsider, curious and brave. Now he was becoming part of a story that required him to be alert, thoughtful, and courageous in ways he had never imagined. That night, as he sat by the fire, he reflected on what he had learned. He had seen the queen's strength, her wisdom, and her care for her people. He had acted alongside her, contributing in a meaningful way, and had survived challenges that would have defeated many others. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. The true measure of trust, respect, and courage was yet to come. He also realized that something else was growing. A quiet bond, built not on words or friendship, but on shared experience, mutual respect, and the understanding that each depended on the other in ways neither could yet fully articulate. He felt a sense of purpose he had not known before, a sense that he was part of something larger than himself. In her tent, the queen prepared for the night, reflecting on the day's events. She had seen potential in this man, courage tempered by humility, strength guided by respect, and curiosity balanced by patience. Yet she knew that survival in her world required more than potential. It required action, wisdom, and the ability to act in harmony with those around you. She was not sure yet if he would fully rise to the challenge, but she was willing to see him try. The stars appeared overhead, bright against the deepening night. The camp settled into quiet activity, the sounds of conversation and preparation fading as the people went about their routines. The cowboy lay under the open sky, feeling the cool breeze on his face and listening to the distant sounds of wildlife. He had survived another day, acted with courage, and begun to understand the world he had entered. But he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the true test of his presence in this land was still ahead. He had entered a story larger than himself, a story of survival, respect, and understanding guided by the strength and wisdom of the Apache queen. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, in her tent, the queen watched the stars as well, considering the man who had entered her world. She had seen courage, honesty, and determination, but she also knew that the days ahead would reveal the true measure of his spirit and the depth of his understanding. The night stretched on, quiet and full of promise. The cowboy and the queen both knew that the journey was far from over. But each had taken another step forward, closer to trust, closer to understanding, and closer to a bond forged in courage and respect. The morning sun rose slowly over the camp, casting a warm, golden light across the tents and the quiet land around them. The cowboy woke with a sense of purpose, knowing that today would be different. He had learned much from the Apache Queen, survived her tests, and begun to understand the rhythm and challenges of her world. But today was not just about learning or survival. It was about proving himself in a way that mattered, a challenge that would show both courage and respect, and perhaps leave a mark on history. The Queen was already moving among her people, checking supplies, giving quiet instructions, and observing the land as if she could hear it speak. Her presence was steady and commanding, and the cowboy felt the familiar mix of awe and determination. He had followed her guidance before, but today he would act more independently, making choices that could affect both himself and the camp. She approached him and spoke quietly, her tone calm but firm. "You have learned patience, courage, and understanding, but today your actions will show the measure of your heart and mind."
Breath. You will face a test that cannot be guided by observation alone. The cowboy nodded, absorbing her words.
He had grown to respect her wisdom and strength, and he understood that this test was more than physical. It was about judgment, trust, and presence of mind. He felt a quiet determination settle over him. He would not fail. They set out together, moving toward a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of sage and earth, and the distant cries of birds echoed across the land. From this vantage point, the cowboy could see a small group approaching, a group of travelers who had been careless and unaware of the hidden camp.
Their horses kicked up dust, and their voices carried across the valley.
The Queen studied them silently, assessing the situation, and then turned to the cowboy.
"This is your moment," she said.
"We cannot simply watch. The safety of the camp may depend on your choices." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. He could sense the urgency, the need for quick thinking and careful action. He remembered everything she had taught him: observation, patience, coordination, and respect for both the land and its inhabitants. Slowly he moved forward, following her subtle gestures and signals. As they approached the ridge, the travelers' horses became startled by a sudden noise from the canyon. The animals reared and whinnied, threatening to run toward the camp. The cowboy acted immediately, guiding the horses gently using the knowledge he had gained over the past days. He moved with care, matching the Queen's precision, signaling the animals and redirecting them safely away from the camp. The Queen observed closely, occasionally offering silent guidance. She had taught him well, and now she watched as he applied everything he had learned. The cowboy felt a surge of pride and focus. Each decision mattered, each movement carried consequence. He was no longer just a visitor. He was participating fully in the survival and safety of her people. After what felt like hours, but was only minutes, the threat passed. The travelers and their horses moved safely away, unaware of how close they had come to causing chaos. The cowboy exhaled, his muscles tense but relieved, and looked to the Queen. She nodded once, sharply, acknowledging his skill and courage. "You acted wisely," she said.
"You have proven more than courage."
"You have shown understanding, respect, and presence of mind. These are the qualities that matter in this world." The cowboy felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had passed a test he could never have imagined when he first entered her camp. But more than that, he felt a connection to her people, to the land, and to the wisdom he had gained. He realized that respect and courage were not measured in legends or stories, but in action, judgment, and understanding. As they returned to the camp, the people greeted him with cautious acknowledgement. There were no celebrations, no loud applause, just quiet recognition of his contribution. The cowboy understood that in this world, respect was earned through deeds, not words, and he felt a deep sense of honor. At evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the queen spoke to him privately.
You have survived, learned, and acted wisely, she said.
Breaths. Few outsiders ever earn the trust of my people, but you have shown that courage and respect can bridge worlds. You may leave at any time, or you may stay and learn more. The choice is yours. The cowboy paused, reflecting on the journey he had taken. He had entered her world as an outsider, curious and bold. He had faced challenges, learned lessons, and survived tests that would have defeated many others. He had gained her trust, and more importantly, he had gained a deeper understanding of life, courage, and respect. I want to stay, he said finally, his voice steady. I have learned much, but I want to learn more, and I want to honor what I have experienced here, not just as a story, but as understanding. The queen regarded him carefully, her expression unreadable but thoughtful. After a long moment, she nodded. Then you will stay. But remember, this is not a place for pride or arrogance. Every action, every choice matters. You will continue to learn, to respect, and to act wisely. Over the following days, the cowboy immersed himself further in the life of the camp. He helped with daily tasks, assisted in teaching younger members, and observed the queen's leadership in countless ways. He learned not just survival skills, but the subtle arts of observation, patience, and understanding human and natural behavior. He began to see the world through new eyes, recognizing the strength and wisdom, the power and careful action, and the importance of mutual respect. The bond between him and the queen grew quietly, built on shared experience and mutual acknowledgement. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. Each understood the other's strengths, the courage it took to survive, and the care needed to act responsibly in a world filled with danger and beauty. They were connected by understanding, respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement of each other's character. One evening, as the sky turned deep indigo and stars began to shimmer, the queen led him to a high ridge overlooking the valley. Below, the camp was peaceful, the fires casting a soft glow across the tents. The cowboy felt a quiet awe, not just at the beauty of the land, but at the life and harmony that she had created here. You see now, she said softly, that courage alone is not enough. Strength alone is not enough. Breath. Understanding, respect, and careful action are what shape the world, and what allow us to survive, thrive, and honor those around us. I understand, he replied. And I will carry this understanding with me wherever I go. The queen nodded, a small but meaningful gesture. In that moment, the cowboy realized that he had not only survived, but had become part of a story larger than himself. A story of courage, respect, and the bridging of worlds once thought separate. Days turned into weeks, and he continued to learn and act alongside her people. He understood their routines, their methods, and the deep knowledge they held of the land and life itself. He had entered a world that many feared, but now he felt at home within it. He had proven himself, not through legend or myth, but through action, understanding, and respect. Eventually, the time came when he would leave the camp, returning to the towns where his journey had begun. The queen approached him at dawn, the first light painting her face in warm hues. You have done well, she said. You have survived, learned, and earned respect. Go now, and carry the story with you, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of courage, understanding, and respect. The cowboy mounted his horse, feeling a mixture of pride, gratitude, and reflection. He looked back at the camp, at the people who had become part of his life, and at the queen, whose wisdom and strength had guided him through every step of the journey. I will not forget, he said quietly, and I will honor what I have learned here. The queen inclined her head, her expression calm and approving. Go with wisdom, courage, and respect. The land and its people will always remember those who act rightly. As he rode away, the valley spread out before him in all its rugged beauty. He felt changed, strengthened, and more aware of the world than he had ever been. The journey had begun as a test of courage, but it had become something far greater, a lesson in understanding, respect, and the quiet power of action guided by wisdom. The townsfolk would later be amazed at his survival. They had heard the stories, the legends of the Apache Queen, and many doubted that anyone could meet her in return. But the cowboy had done more than return. He had carried back understanding, respect, and a story that challenged old fears and misconceptions. And somewhere in the quiet of the Apache lands, the Queen watched, knowing that the man who had dared to enter her world had left it stronger, wiser, and worthy of respect. The legend of the Apache Queen continued, but now it carried a new dimension. Proof that courage and respect could bridge worlds, and that understanding could thrive even in places once thought impossible for outsiders to survive. The wind whispered across the valley, carrying with it stories of the past, lessons of the present, and the promise of the future. The cowboy rode on, aware that he had become part of something larger than himself, carrying the legacy of courage, trust, and wisdom wherever he went. And in the quiet under the endless sky, the Apache Queen's presence remained, a symbol of strength, understanding, and the power of guiding others with wisdom and care. The story of the man who survived her tent would be told for years, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of respect, courage, and the quiet triumph of understanding.